ECOWAS chairperson and Ghanaian President Nana Akufo Addo says the United Nations Peacekeeping mission must continue to operate in Mali.
All of the states in West Africa are vulnerable to the penetration of terrorist outrages in West Africa. And we are therefore re-examining, together with our friends and partners, the manner in which we can respond most effectively to these emerging threats. That there is a need for a broad coalition of forces against terrorism in West Africa is indisputable.
Well, let's get some insight on this developing story. We are joined now by Open Society Foundation's analyst Ibrahima Kane. He heads the African Union Advocacy Program of the Africa Regional Office. He speaks to us from the Senegalese capital of Dakar. Mr. Kane, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. We just heard what the chair of ECOWAS had to say, President Nana Akufo Addo. We had Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara earlier on criticize the planned departure of the French and European troops. What are your thoughts on these developments?
Well, I think the French departure from Mali is the end of one era, the era of the dominance of the French in West Africa, Francophone countries. You know, the fight between the French and the Mali government reached a point where it's the whole French strategy for West Africa that is collapsing. The French came in Mali 10 years ago with four objectives. One was to protect the integrity of the territory of Mali, to reestablish the power of the government, to really stop what they call the jihadists from operating in the soil of Mali, and also to stop them from progressing in the rest of the Sahel region. None of these objectives were achieved. And the French are now trying to decide who should remain in power, who should not remain in power in West Africa. Look the difference of treatment between the Mali military government and the Chad military government. I think the population in West Africa, Francophone now, are just seeing the French are, the former colonial master who is continuing to play games, and people want now that to end and for Africans to take their own destiny in hand.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Mr. Kane, because as you say, not only have there been protests in Mali asking the French government to leave, it's been well documented that the French have continued to want to exert its power and influence, particularly on Francophone Africa. So it says it's not a failure, but says the military junta in Mali is asking it to leave. Does the junta not have a right, or whoever governs Mali not have the right to say your presence is no longer welcome?
Of course they have the right. You know, as long as I know, the current junta is the one that's running Mali. You know, the French president, has no other say because he's going into election and he has to justify why the French are still in the Sahel region. And, for a country that is paying almost 1 billion euros a year, to entertain a military troops on the ground, this you cannot say to your population that it failed. But Africans know, in Mali, people know that the French failed. Because when the French arrived in Mali 10 years ago, it was only the northern part of the country that was dominated by the jihadists. Now, the jihadists have almost reached the border with Cote d'Ivoire. And it's not only Mali that is now in trouble. Burkina Faso is in trouble. Niger is in trouble. The last 2 weeks, you heard about attacks in Benin, attacks in Togo. So the whole region, despite the presence of 5,000 French military, nothing has changed. It's getting worse and worse. And the people in the region and, this military government has also the right to say that it's a failure, that we need to change the way the people are operating. I think it's fair for them to really criticize the French government.
As you say, Côte d'Ivoire is itself vulnerable at the moment. Is that why President Alassane Ouattara say this is a very dangerous development because it would leave a void? At the same time, this is not just a French pull-out, it's the European allies. The Germans are pulling out. Mali has told the Dutch to pull out of Mali as well. So is it a legitimate fear? Or as you have said, after more than 9 years of presence, they've done little to shore up the security of these sovereign governments?
Well, we can call it a fear, but I think, for me, I call it a turning point for African government, particularly for West African government. I like to compare the current situation with what happened around 20 years ago when Liberia and Sierra Leone were completely in the hand of rebels group. At that time, there was a leadership in Nigeria, and that leadership decided on behalf of ECOWAS to go there and to stop this rebel group from operating and to reorganize the state in Liberia and in Sierra Leone. That leadership is now missing in West Africa. Yeah. We all know what Nigeria, how Nigeria is today. And I think that this turning point is a call for African states to look at the situation in their region and to take responsibility to deal with the situation. It's not about changing France with Russia or changing, France with Turkey or China. It's about the responsibility of African leaders to try to tackle this problem in their region and to really try to save their region from the takeover by, the terrorist group and insurgents in the central part of
President Ouattara making that point, saying that African armies should step in to fill the void. But you mentioned the presence of the Russians, the Chinese, the Turkish, which France refers to as hired guns or militants. Is this a test then for the African Union, which has a stated objective of silencing the guns and whose deadline is very much near, to put that to action? Does it have the capacity to do that? And does that also mean saying to your Russians, your Turkish, your Chinese that you too ought to follow suit?
Yes, I mentioned the lack of leadership in West Africa that explained the current situation. But I can also add the lack of solidarity of African countries. What is happening in the Sahel region is known by all the 55 African countries. So far, they've done nothing. And I say nothing bluntly because you have armies that are capable of really helping the Sahel region countries in there. I start with South Africa. South Africa has that capacity, military capacity to support. Egypt has the military capacity to support, and Egypt has even a large experience in terms of fighting insurgents. You have Northern Africa, Algeria, you have Morocco. None of these countries have really stepped in the situation in the Sahel region to try to help the Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso to deal with this situation. So that lack of solidarity, makes this strategy of silencing the gun, a joke for West African, because we are not seeing any step taken by African countries to do something about this situation that is, getting from bad to worse. And we need solidarity among African states. We need support, to these three countries to try to overcome, a problem that is not really beyond our capacity as African. We have
Mr.
the
Kane,
possibility.
Can regional politics be to blame for this lack of unity? I'm going to use the African Union itself, the chairperson position, and how often Anglophone and Francophone Africa have jostled over the position. Should I say, tensions between Francophone Africa and South Africa itself, South Africa being accused often of behaving like Big Brother. You spoke about Egypt. North Africa as a region often being seen as unsupportive of African ideals. It itself being accused of interfering in the governance of countries where North Africa seeks to spread its influence beyond what the vision is of what would be called sub-Saharan Africa.
Well, but these are the same country you mentioned are the one that a few years ago in Addis decided that Africa should develop a strategy of African solution to African problem. They are the one. Nobody asked them to do it. Themselves, they decided to do it. And some of those countries shown their solidarity. You see Rwanda's army going to Mozambique to support the government against the insurgents. And that is the kind of solidarity that we need in Africa. African armies, you have some of them that are really very strong, that have a lot of experience. And the jihadism is something new in West Africa, so it's not very difficult to deal with them. But that lack of solidarity, the fact that we leave all our problems to the hand for external actors, that's for me one of the problems. I'm just trying to explain to you.
Yes.
For the Sahel region, there have been 19 strategies adopted since the beginning of the Serval the French deployment in West Africa. 19. None of them was structured, developed by African countries. All of them were imposed by external. When are we going to do things for ourselves? When are we going to start thinking by ourselves and for ourselves? That's why I think the departure of France from Mali, and the fact that the Mali junta, expelled the French ambassador, all of that are some of the acts that I think can really help Africa to move away from the situation.
As you say this, there is a meeting taking place in Brussels at the moment. And whether we like it or not, some of these things are going to create that line of alignment or division for African countries as they negotiate on some of these things that they're looking to do: developments, cooperation, economic trade cooperation, political dimensions. And we have seen, I'll use the EPAs as an example, how African countries have failed to take advantage of their power as a united front, being torn apart by the agreements that are being put on the table by Europe. So how do you foresee some of these issues playing out? And against the background of the Cotonou Partnership Agreement, that's very recent.
Yes, but you see, it's quite very interesting that you mentioned the current meeting in Brussels. For the first time since the beginning of an Africa-EU relationship, for the first time, the Africans refused to accept the plan that was prepared by the European countries. The meeting agenda was only adopted 1 week ago. It tells you about the new thinking within African countries about their relationship with Europe. And I think the new generation of political leaders in Africa are now understanding that if they don't do something about the shift in terms of, this asymmetric relationship with Europe, we won't go anywhere. And I think the fact that they changed the method of work, they changed the approach in this kind of meeting between Africa and Europe, it's a good sign, in my view, that something new is happening, that African people are taking themselves seriously and are trying to really find an advantage in terms of relationship with Europe. And I think they have here an opportunity because Africa is rich. Many people know that Africa is a big market, one of the biggest in the world, particularly with the creation of the CFTA, that they need to negotiate very hard. Africa doesn't belong to Europe. Africa doesn't belong to China. Africa doesn't belong to other, the US and that. Now we need to negotiate because it's about the life of 1.5 billion of African that is really at stake. So there is a need to work hard to do things that will really help us to move boundaries. You recall that because I heard in your program earlier that your president is the champion about the vaccine. How can we accept that a rich continent like Africa can only have 7 or 8% of the population vaccinated, while the other people are reaching 80 and 90% of the population vaccinated? It's unfair, and Africa now has to change the way it operates to be able to also get the maximum of benefit for its own population. And I think the current discussion in Brussels shows that we are just getting into there, and they need to continue and to get the support of their population so that they can do better for the benefit of our country.
Ibrahima Kane, thank you so much for your time and your insights, sir. He is the Open Society Foundation analyst, speaking to us about myriad of issues, particularly focusing on European forces pull out from Mali and other surrounding countries, fears of a vacuum, which others warn could lead to jihadists attempting more coups or taking over other territory. But this happens against the backdrop of the EU-Africa summit, where, as he says, some tough issues are going to be hammered out, but Africa showing leadership and unity and standing together. We're watching those developments. Our teams there in Brussels are going to send us more visuals and, of course, reporting on that.